Hello?
Oh, hey. Oh, sorry. I need to turn my volume up here.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Sorry. I realized I was like, can you hear me? I couldn't hear myself.
No worries. How you doing this morning?
Uh, I'm good. I'm good.
Nice.
Um, yeah. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too.
so let's go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining.
Oh,
Um,
should I change my name, by the way? I put the how you pronounce it. I don't know if that's helpful or not. I
that's
probably
fine.
shouldn't have put that.
That's fine. That's totally fine. Um, for anyone who may watch this at a later time and doesn't know who you are, would you mind giving us like a quick 1 to 2 minute intro of who you are, what you're passionate about, and what you've accomplished so far?
Yeah, my name is Dr. Angela Catalessa. I got my
Yeah.
doctorate in human and organizational learning in 2018 from George Washington University. And at that time, I decided to write my doctoral dissertation on the lived experiences of modern day polymaths. So, Renaissance men and women. Um, and I also have a career in the federal government in training and development, leadership development across the entire federal enterprise. And I'm a program manager in that regard. And what else? I manage a family real estate business. I consider myself an author. I wrote my dissertation. I'm also working on a couple of books. I'm a mom, a wife, a friend. What else can I tell you? Before I worked in my current role, let me go back to my federal government job. Sorry, I'm bouncing all around here, but I spent the beginning of my federal career from 2007 to 2013 as a non-political appointee at the Executive Office of the President. Yeah, and I live near the Washington D.C. area. So is that a good?
Nice.
And I'm originally from San Francisco. I grew up in the East
Nice.
Bay near
Nice.
Berkeley.
You've done all the things, you do all the things.
Oh, thank you.
yeah. So, one of the things that you mentioned obviously was your dissertation, and that's absolutely awesome. I had the pleasure of reading it, and actually, it was one of the things that sparked me into the whole being a polymath, living a polymathic lifestyle type of way of life.
Mm-hmm.
And for me personally, one of the biggest things that I got out of the dissertation was this idea of intrapersonal diversity. And I just, for some reason, really attached to that because, I mean, a little bit about me, like I grew up in Colorado and attended the Colorado School of Mines, mostly because I, like, out of high school, I had this desire to impact people's lives. And the people around me told me that engineering was the way to do that. So I went to college and did really well. Ended up getting a full ride scholarship and participated in a lot of programs there and led organizations. But ultimately, just decided that engineering was like sucking the life out of me.
Mm.
And after reading your dissertation, like I realized it was because I've just always been interested in a lot of things. And for me personally, trying to force myself to stick to that one, like STEM, especially the Colorado School of Mines is very STEM focused. Like it just specializes in STEM. So like being forced to specialize and continuously study that one particular way of life just suffocated me. And so then I discovered this intrapersonal diversity, and within the brand Da Vinci's Dream, like that's something that I'm really passionate about is showing people that their many skills, interests, and experiences are what makes them them, and by embracing
Yeah.
those things, they can really like go on to impact people's lives. So for me personally, that was very powerful. But I'm curious, like how you came up, like how you're introduced to that idea of interpersonal diversity, and what it means to you personally.
Yeah. Real quick, I just want to say I just love the name Da Vinci's Dream because obviously Leonardo da Vinci, the quintessential polymath. I think he would dream for people to live like you're talking about, to be broad and not super narrow, and to be able to be all of the parts of themselves. But to answer your question, I in 2015 when I originally started my doctoral program, I I remember it was like in that phase where like they gave you a bunch of reading but you hadn't gone to classes yet. So it was the very beginning of my doctoral program. And I can't even remember what book I was reading, but I just remember reading something and going, there's another kind of diversity, or I just sort of had some sort of thought. And I think I even wrote in the margin of that book, what about diversity within a person? And then I kept playing with that idea. And actually, one of the things that people had advised me to do during a doctoral program is to try to pick my dissertation topic earlier in the program, so that as I had projects and papers, I could, you know, work them into my topic and try to get some of the writing and research done along the way. So anyway, I remember thinking, I really like this idea of within one person, intrapersonal diversity. And it sounds like being a Renaissance man or woman, and that's the kind of person I want to be. And so I had this spark from reading something, even though I was trying to live that way as myself for years prior to that, though I didn't know the word polymath. And I thought I created the term. I thought, oh my gosh, I am a genius. I have created this new idea. How awesome is that? And then I looked into the literature and I realized, no, I wasn't that clever. There are people who figured that out before me. And so what I found was, in the scholarly literature, intrapersonal diversity first appeared in the academic literature in relation to studying the gut microbiome. And so scientists had done research, and like everybody knows nowadays, that the more diversity you have in your gut microbiome, the healthier you are. And there's probiotics and prebiotics and all these things you can take to try to increase your intrapersonal diversity in your gut, which has implications for your whole system. So I found that. And then I also found an article by Bunderson and Sutcliffe, who had actually written about it in terms of people's personalities and approaches to life. And they had written about it, they called it functional intrapersonal diversity. And so what they had conceptualized is that when you look at someone's career and how many different functions they have worked in, you can determine if they're functionally intrapersonally diverse. So they looked at it in career, but I also sort of felt like, well, aren't there other ways we can be diverse within our individual selves? Right. That's not our gut and that's not at work? Like, isn't there some larger approach to life where we can be interpersonally diverse?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what I wanted to look at. Of course, our careers are a big part of what make up who we are and how we experience life. So I looked at that, but I also looked at like hobbies and experiences and other things that make up who we are and how diverse we can be. Sorry, there's my husband answering the door. We must have an Amazon delivery or something. There's the dog. That's Nico.
Hello.
There's the package. Anyway, what was I saying? So yeah, I equated this idea of intrapersonal diversity. So here's my point: is that I feel like one of the contributions that my research made was that it equated this idea that kind of existed a little bit in the gut and in workplaces, equated intrapersonal diversity with polymathy, because in my mind they were kind of the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it's super important. Like you mentioned, just being a whole human. I mean, one of the things that society focuses on, in my opinion, quite often is like the external diversity of human beings. And yes, obviously, external diversity is very important because interestingly enough, I also feel like when people are talking about that external diversity, in a way, what they're really focusing on is the intrapersonal diversity, because like, when you're talking about people from different cultures, the reason it's so important to have those people from different cultures come together is because they come with different experiences and different ways of thinking. And in my opinion, those are all a culmination of like the diversity within a human being. So that's something that's interesting. But yeah, absolutely. Like I said, that was one of the things that stuck with me the most. And so I really appreciate that contribution.
Oh, thank you. And I appreciate that you appreciate it, because it is important. Diversity as a topic area gets a lot of attention and it matters and it's important, but it only ever looks at groups. Like,
Yeah.
is this diverse group, and is this a small group or a large group? Or, there's different ways at the macro and meso levels that people look at diversity, but it almost never gets looked at the micro level of
Yeah.
analysis,
Yeah.
and that matters too. So the field of diversity studies needs to become more diverse itself. It's ironic. It's ironic,
That's a
really.
really good way to put it. That's a
Yeah.
really good way to put
Yeah.
it. So going to that micro level, I mean, I have a hard time with society's emphasis on expertise personally, just because I feel like individuals, as we all live our own individual experiences, like we're all experts in something one way or another. Well, like our culmination of experiences leads us to be a unique expert in that experience. However, with
Mm-hmm.
that said, I would definitely consider you to be an expert in modern day polymaths, considering all the research that you've done up to this point. So, going to the micro level, in your opinion, what aspects of just living a polymathic life, like what components are essential for living a polymathic life? Like, how can we maximize our interpersonal diversity to the point where we are living a fulfilling polymathic lifestyle?
Yeah. Well, society will tell you to be a narrow specialist. Everybody be a narrow specialist. That's the
Mm,
messaging we get. And it's sad too. I mean, even when we apply for jobs, I remember being taught in college, like, here's how you write a resume, and you need to tailor it to the job and tell the story of, you know, specialization matching the job description, which of course is very narrow and specific. So we're not even allowed to like be who we really are and bring extra things to the table, because that's
right.
considered distracting. So I think you have to be willing to not fit in that box. And the box analogy, I just want to say, there were, so many times when I was interviewing polymaths, and so many of them use this box analogy, living outside the box, which I believe allows them to think outside the box. And I'm sure we're going to get to that later. But, you have to be willing to sort of not follow that prescription. So you really have to be self-authored and kind of, I like to say, curate rather than create, because curate your life, it implies some sort of like thought, because we're all
Mm,
creating our lives. But if you're
right.
curating your lives, it means you're giving it some thought.
Doing it with
Um,
intention in a way.
exactly, like you've thought about, and not to say that like you have to plan out and curate every single little aspect of your life, because it's really important too to like be flexible and go with the flow, and for surprise elements and opportunities to arise in our lives as they will. But there's something to be said too for being intentional about how you want to live your life on purpose to some extent.
Mm,
um, Polymaths are really good examples of people who are being who they really are in all their multifaceted breadth and depth. Um, they are self-directed learners, continual learners. Like, polymaths are learners, and also to some extent experiencers. That's one thing I'd like to underscore too, is a lot of times when we talk about polymathy, it's just talked about in terms of like intellect, like what can I learn that
yeah.
is information.
Yeah.
But there's something very enriching and important as well about broad experiences and exposure, which is a kind of learning, but it's not the kind of learning you're going to get out of a book. And
Right.
both of those types matter. They're curious people. They are people who value a feeling of freedom. They value being able to change and morph and follow their curiosities over time, even as their curiosities change. They want to be able to use their talent. Nothing will drive a polymath crazier than feeling like I have all this talent and I can't use it.
Yeah.
That's very frustrating for polymath. And I think also, there's a lot of challenges. One of the things I kind of unearthed in my research was polymaths are people who we can admire for the most part. They're intelligent and hardworking and brave and curious, and they are dedicated to lifelong continual self-directed learning. But there's also a lot of challenges involved with being a polymath. And so in order to succeed as a polymath to some extent, you have to be willing to sort of roll with the punches and the challenges that may come along, at least in modern society where there is this dominant ideology of specialization that tells us if you want to succeed, you better specialize. So, it takes some bravery to navigate through like the storytelling of your polymathy and the relationship implications of polymathy, the financial implications of polymathy. So there are a number of challenges involved with navigating life as a polymath. Like, it's not all roses. It's really great, and I recommend it. I think it's a great way to be, but there are challenges as well.
And how, so obviously you live this way of life. How have you been able to overcome some of those challenges?
In my case, I feel like, I've learned to be good at switching and juggling. Like, that is one of the challenges of being a polymath, is like, how do I prioritize? How do I keep all these plates spinning? And so I've learned to be really good at switching and juggling. For example, when I wrote this dissertation, I worked full time. I completed my entire doctoral program, including the dissertation, in 3 years, which is like record speed. Most people, not to toot my own horn, but most people take 5 or 6 years.
Right.
And I also became a mother. Like, I went through a pregnancy and became a mother for the first time, kept my family real estate business afloat.
Yeah.
And I also had a dying grandfather that I was watching over. And like, I did all that at the same time. So it's just a skill I have developed over time, is being able to juggle, being very efficient and quick. I think my brain works pretty quickly, so that helps in my case. But the answer is I juggle, and I've learned to be good at it. And nowadays, I'm not a student anymore, so I only sort of juggle my federal career and the family real estate business and family life. I'm also a board member in a singing group in which I sing. I'm a coach. And I have hobbies. I don't have as many hobbies as I did before I was a mom, but, I like to cook. I like to make a beautiful home. I like makeup, and fashion and like girly things like that.
Yeah.
And so, and part of why I do all those things, just my own story, is because I don't really feel like my 40-hour-a-week job fulfills every possible need I have. And I'm not sure that's realistic. Like, I don't know, maybe there are some people who really get like all their needs fulfilled by the job that they get, paid to do 40 hours a week. If for people who even do that anymore.
Yeah,
I feel like sometimes like a dinosaur because I do that. But I wear different hats, and so how my polymath shows up is that I wear a lot. That's that analogy I use, is that I wear a lot of different hats. I like to also, I've been like this ever since I was a kid. I love to daydream about the future. I love to envision and imagine, like, if anything could be possible for me to live the life of my dreams, what would that be? And I still do that. And I have like journals and diaries from when I was younger, where, and in fact, here's a funny story I'll share with you. I think it's kind of a cool story. When I was 12, my grandmother, who was a voracious reader, she would take me to the bookstore with her, and she'd let me get whatever books I wanted. She loved to read, and she encouraged me to read and was very generous in sort of letting me get whatever I wanted. And when I was 12, I found this book. It was probably 6 to 8 inches thick. It was huge. It was like a listing of thousands of internships that existed in the United States. And this was 1993. So this was before, the masses had internet access.
Oh, okay.
And so that's how they did it back then. I feel like a dinosaur.
It was a big book.
But like, I lived through that too. I lived in a time where there were not cell phones and where internships were listed in an 8-inch directory.
I don't know how you did it.
I don't know how I did it either, but I remember like laying on my bed and like highlighting in this book, and I came across this it said there was a White House internship, and for some reason that blew my mind, that like a place like the White House would have interns, because I thought interns are like super entry level and volunteers. And I remember when I was 12, I wrote in my diary, like, okay, someday I'm going to be a White House intern, or I'd like to be.
Yeah.
And sure enough, when I think I was 24, I applied when I was in my master's program, and I got in. And so that's an example for me of like, I really just love dreaming about my future, and then like maneuvering my way through life to try to make it come true. A couple other things, and I feel like I'm talking so much, but
no, you're fine. You're fine.
I have just always felt this desire to be my best self. It's like an insatiable mission. I feel like it's in my DNA. Like, how can I be the best version of me? And so, in addition to like, for me, that showed up in like going to school and traveling and being in therapy and reading and going to conferences and seminars and workshops. And so, I'm not perfect, but I aim to live my life free of regret to the extent that I can. And so my polymathy shows up in like trying to savor the full human experience and be the best version of me that I can be. I've traveled quite a lot. That for me, that was another way. Travel and adventure, especially in my 20s. I'm in a different stage now. I'm nearly 40 and I have a 3-year-old daughter.
Family, yeah.
I have a family. And so like skydiving and riding motorcycles and bungee jumping and some of the stuff that I used to do doesn't really work now. But I've been to 40 countries on 6 continents. I've lived abroad twice. I've done a bit of traveling on my own. And if you name an adventure sport, I have probably tried it. And so
that's awesome.
So part of how polymathy has showed up for me as well is just really trying to have that broad experience, and really feel like I'm all in at life. I'm in it, and I want to live really vibrantly and fully.
Mm-hmm. And so, kind of tying this back to the previous question, in your research and like your interviews with other polymathic individuals, did you find other polymathic people with this like drive for, one, self-improvement, and then 2, like the habit of like visualizing where your future is going to go, like how you want your future to play out? Did you find anyone else who had that habit as well?
I definitely interviewed people who felt this need for self-improvement. Like I'm like popping off several of the people I interviewed who talked about that specifically. Just this real desire to be the best they could be, to the point where some of them just like don't ever take a day off. If they have free time, downtime, they're just doing something that feels like self-improvement or productivity or contribution in some way. Mm-hmm. I remember one of the interviewees, she told me that basically since the age of 3, she had been constantly working like 16 hours a day, like every minute, basically. And she was intense about it. But she was like, no, and she was in her mid 40s at that point. She's like, well, if you spend 40 plus years working on being the best version of yourself and improving yourself, like you can get to be pretty good.
Yeah, eventually you'll get there.
I hope so.
Yeah. Can't argue with that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and what was the second part of your question? Self-improvement, and then
the visualizing, the habit of visualizing. Yeah.
That didn't really come up that I can recall in my interviews where people were talking about visualization and list making and stuff like that. It definitely did come up about being kind of organized. Like, in order to have some level of achievement, you have to be able to manage time and manage priorities and like get stuff done.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I didn't dig that deep, but I would imagine that list making and being organized in order to achieve your goals probably is something that they do, but I didn't ask that. Just for me, I know that's how I like to operate, is making those lists and checking them off. Like, I love that feeling of scratching off something that I was able to get done, or a dream that was able to come true.
Just reaching out to like this community, it really does seem like when people struggle with living a polymathic lifestyle, like the biggest crutch that they have is like being able to effectively manage their time. And I continuously run into this theme of what do they call it? Like self-distraction. Like people constantly feel like they just distract themselves. And so I guess like one of the biggest ways we can help this community is just curating the most effective ways to combat that feeling of self-distraction. Because like you said, time
Yeah.
management is extremely important when you're just like, I want to do this and do this and do this, and I want to experience that and go here and also do this as well.
Yeah. And it's so easy. I did hear this from my participants too, is that with the internet, it's just so easy to go down rabbit holes and spend hours and get distracted, and like you may have goals and projects that you want to work on, but then you're so curious about these things that you want to learn about that you can really spend a lot of time. And not that that's that learning could be very valuable even if it was unplanned learning.
Yeah.
Not to say that that's not valuable as well, but in terms of actually being able to scratch things off your list, like it does take some focus. Not that that's the only thing you can focus on, but in order to achieve goals, like you may have to hunker down and focus for some periods of time. So there's
And
this
that,
balance of like, I want to be broad, but then I may have moments of having to be focused at the same time.
yeah, and absolutely. That actually reminds me. There's like these two. I don't know how famous they are, but two ideologies surrounding learning, which is constantly a struggle for me to balance between. Because on the one hand, there's this method of like brute force learning, and so it's basically the ideology of, if you want to learn something, the best way to do it is just to surround yourself with that idea, that concept, that topic all the time. So whether when you're reading and you're trying to learn Spanish, you should be reading about Spanish, reading Spanish books. When you're watching something, you should be watching something in Spanish, watching how to learn Spanish. When you're perusing the internet, you should be looking up Spanish words. So like just surrounding yourself with whatever you're trying to learn. But then there's also this ideology, which I'm really fond of, is just in time learning. And so like when you're trying to start a business, a perfect example, there's so many things that you have to keep in mind when you're starting a business, and it would be really easy to just go down those rabbit holes. But the most effective way to do it would be, okay, I need to market this, I need to learn how to market, and then like you're running an event, so that's when you learn how to run an event rather than just constantly trying to learn about everything. And so I think it's
Yeah.
really important to try to figure out how to balance those two aspects when it comes to learning and planning out the experiences that you want to have and so forth.
Yeah. When you were explaining that, I was reminded, because it kind of relates to like, okay, do I dive in deep and like sort of have micro moments of deep focus, or micro days of deep focus versus sort of learning as I need it? It reminded me, this may be weird, I probably shouldn't even share this, but I remember when I was in undergrad, I was very studious and I would read like every single bit of reading that was assigned to me. And it was a lot. Like college, there was a lot of reading, hours and hours every day that I would spend reading for 4 years. And it took focus and concentration to read stuff that I didn't pick.
Right.
I may
Yeah,
have picked the
absolutely.
class out of a list of options, but I didn't pick what I'm reading there. But yet I forced myself to, because it was part of the learning and a part of the class. And I used to do this weird thing where I would like go to a bustling, energetic, stimulating environment. Like I would go to a loud, bustling coffee shop. I just didn't want to sit in a familiar environment. I didn't want to sit like in my dorm room or something and read. I wanted to get out and go somewhere new, novel. The beach, or a new spot in the library, or a new coffee shop, or just anywhere else than somewhere that I was very familiar with. And I feel like there was something there, like something about being stimulated by my environment, that kind of helped counterbalance the focus that it took to hunker down and just read the stuff that I was assigned.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was a random side note.
But also, yeah, that's a good point. It's a good point. It just goes
helped
back
me.
to like how to balance between these things, and obviously environment is super important when it comes to that as well.
And just knowing yourself too, like if you know, okay, I need to hunker down and like do X, Y, and Z in order to reach my next goal. What will help me get in the state that will help me do that? And so for me, it was, let me get somewhere novel to help me sort of get through the dredge of reading something I might not really want to be reading.
Right.
And so I think the bigger point is, though, learn how you learn how you achieve, learn how you get stuff done. And then once you have that awareness, like make it happen on purpose when you need it to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. So one of the other things I wanted to discuss was regarding the polymath movement, obviously identity is super important, and just being able to identify yourself as a polymath
Mm-hmm.
is like super beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
However, there's also all of these other ways to identify as while living this lifestyle, including like multi-potentialite, scanner, generalist, jack of all trades, polymath. Like the list probably goes on and
Right.
on. People have been living this way of life without concluding on a single definition for years. So, with that said, how do you feel like, well, I guess with the people that you studied, the way they
Mm-hmm.
identified themselves, did you see any particular way, like how that affected their polymathic way of living? That was all over the
Yeah,
place.
I did notice for the people who were like, I am a polymath, who like really owned it, they were
Yeah.
the most successful. They were the most
Interesting.
successful. Yeah, for the people who were like, oh, like I think I might be this, or I think I'm that, but I don't want, it's boasting. I don't want to use that word. You know, they were also very accomplished, but they, I don't know, they just, there's something about owning it and labeling it that helps you be even greater in that. You
Hmm.
know, and I want to get back. You mentioned earlier some of the other ways. First off, I want to say there's not a great term.
Hmm.
Like I use the term polymath, but even that, I'm like, I never really loved that word. Like I sort of begrudgingly accepted it as the best option.
Hmm.
You know, polymath means many learnings. And the math is not mathematics. It's from the Greek manthanon, to learn. So it means many learnings, or many learnings.
Right.
Um, so it's the one that felt accurate to me, the most accurate. But multi-potentialite is another one. Sort of Emily Wapnick, and you know, it's in popular culture. Emily uses it, but I'm not a big fan of that word because multi-potentialite means you have a lot of potential.
Right.
Potential doesn't mean like you did anything. Doesn't mean you did any follow through. I mean, I think everybody just has potential. There's a
Yeah.
potential that like anything could happen right now. It's potential, like even if it's 0.0001% possibility.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't like that term personally, and I don't want to use it. Scan.
Okay.
That's for me. You know, other people use what you're comfortable with.
Right.
You know, use what you like. But for me, I don't ever use that one. Some people use the term scanner, which is, I think, a little bit different. Scanner is, I like a lot of variety, but I don't want to go deep. I don't want to have any expertise really. I just want to scan and learn about a lot of things very broadly without the depth.
Hmm.
Uh, Generalist, I would say polymaths are a type of generalist. Generalist is a very general term, and it doesn't really indicate much except you have general knowledge.
Yeah.
Um, and then polymath, what makes polymath something I like and something that's different than the other terms is that polymath says I have breadth and depth. Like I want to learn about a lot of things, I want to experience a lot of things, but I also want to have depth in them. So I'm not just a dabbler in them. I do have some level of expertise and accomplishment. And so that's what I aspire to have. Like I don't want to be a scanner or dabbler. I want to be a polymath.
Okay.
Of course, polymaths come in all. There's a range. You know, not all of us are going to be Da Vinci, who's like a eminent creative genius. Like that's at the far end of the spectrum. But just because Leonardo da Vinci was this amazing, quintessential example of what a polymath could be, that doesn't mean if you're not at Da Vinci's level that if you're someone who's in the middle of the spectrum or even at the lower end of the spectrum, I think you could still identify as a polymath or as a polymathic person.
Hmm.
There are just different degrees of polymathy. Some people also use this term, obviously, Renaissance man or woman. Renaissance soul is one that some people use. I
Hmm.
recently heard about multi-passionistas. That's a
Yeah.
creative one. Or multis. Some people just say multis. Um, yeah, and like you pointed out too, some people don't have any label or word, but then they experience this phenomenon. Like that's who they are, but they don't even have a label for it. So for me, I like to say I'm polymathic. Like I am a polymathic person. I don't usually say I am a polymath, even though I think that I am
Hmm.
in the spectrum, probably in the middle somewhere. But yeah, I like to say I'm polymathic. And like you said, back to the beginning, there's something really powerful when you say I am something. And when you own that identity, I feel like it enhances it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate that you pointed out the range, because I think that's
Yes.
super important. Like when I first was introduced to the term polymath, like obviously for me it was in the form of Da Vinci, and but with that said, people innately, in my opinion, are polymathic individuals. And the extent
Mm-hmm.
to that is just how you choose to live your life, like how often you choose to dive into new experiences and how far you go into those experiences. And so that range is super important. But on the
Mm-hmm.
one end, like there's just a polymathic lifestyle where you
Mm-hmm.
actively choose to dive into new learnings and you actively seek to contribute to the human experience. Because personally, I feel like that's a super important part of being a polymath. And then
Yeah.
there's like the well-respected polymath who has contributed to multiple fields of the human experience and like is super respected by his peers and things of that nature. But I don't think
Right.
that everyone has to aspire to be that person in order to live a polymathic lifestyle.
Right. For
With that
sure.
said, I guess also it's just I don't think that there's like a the perfect term. Obviously, it doesn't exist. But what is important is that
Yeah.
people find the term that allows them to embrace that polymathic lifestyle. Because if we're all just going through life, like I have to find the one thing that I'm passionate about, and I have to specialize in that, or I won't be successful. Like I feel like that is a huge recipe for disaster when it comes to society's ability to solve these complex problems that we continue to be introduced to.
Yeah. I totally agree. I want to add something else too, like that has to do with identity. Um, so social identity theory says that we get our sense of identity because we can find a group of that we fit into. And
Mhm.
so I identify as someone with a doctorate because there's a group of people with doctorates and I fit in. I just fit in. That's what I got. That's who I am, and so I fit
Mhm.
in there. But what I learned from my interviews with polymaths, which was a really one of the more interesting um, findings from my research, is that and granted, my research took place a couple years ago. I finished my dissertation 2 years ago, so it's not exactly most cutting edge current, and
Right.
things have changed a lot in 2 years. But most polymaths said they realize they're this way because they can't fit in. They can't find a group where they really feel comfortable.
Mm.
And so one of the things that I have tried to do, because I felt, well, I believed them. I believed them that that was true, and I could see how that's accurate. And plus, each polymath is such a unique combination. It may be impossible to find an exact group of like
Yeah.
your unique combination,
That's a good point.
but just a group of polymathic people. When I did my research, none of the people I interviewed had any sort of community or group of polymaths that helped them explore their polymathy and get comfortable with it. That just didn't exist. And I think there's just now actually I feel like one of the things I'm trying to do is to create that sort of environment where people can get comfortable with that identity and really step into it.
Mm.
So the Facebook group I have called Polymath's Place, and I use that word on purpose because I was like, well, here's a place you can have. I'll give you a place. You need a place? Come to my place.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
um, and I have a YouTube a channel I called Polymath's Place, where I talk a lot. Basically, I share a lot of what was in my dissertation just in a video format.
Yeah.
Um,
I
and
think that's super
so
important though.
Yeah. So I've tried to create a sense of place. There are a few other pockets that do that as well. But it's one of the things I think if more people could get in a group of where people are talking about polymathy and that kind of way of living and that way of approach to life, if people got comfy with it and saw other people talking about it and living that way, and if you could see examples of other people doing that, I think it would help people become more comfortable. So that's one of the things I'm trying to do.
Yeah, which is awesome. And speaking to that, I know that another thing that you're super involved in is like the organizational structure, or like how institutions
Mm-hmm.
either ostracize or implement the polymathic individuals' ability to contribute to those organizations. So
Yes.
I'm curious, in an ideal world, how would an organization effectively leverage the polymathic individuals that like contribute to their success?
Mm-hmm. Well, what I'd like for organizations to consider is that the kind of old world belief that everybody should be a specialist within their organizational positions no longer works. Like the world is just too complex to have a team of all specialists. Please don't do that anymore. Let's think strategically. Sorry. There's a way to be more strategic about getting the right people on the bus and in the right seats. And at its core, I mean, I really think there's like two types of positions that organizational leaders need to think of. Like there is the type of position that's routine, stable, and for that kind of role, a specialist makes a lot of sense because, just being specialized and digging in deep and doing things tomorrow like we did them yesterday may work just fine, like accounting, something like that.
Yeah.
But there's other types of roles and entire organizations who exist in this kind of VUCA environment, VUCA. That stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So in a VUCA environment, it's also been described as being a wicked learning environment, or a harsh learning environment, or with wicked problems.
Okay.
And so if you have that kind of a role where there are a lot of difficult challenges and a lot of constant change, you can't just be routine and rote with how you try to address those problems. So organizations need to get that basic truth that like some positions make sense for specialists and some positions don't. Some positions you need people with a broader toolkit, who can adapt and pull from this large toolkit, skills and experience to solve the problem. So first, organizations got to think strategically and see that that's accurate. And then they need to attract. The way you would attract a polymath, I think, would be different than the way you attract a specialist. And what, as I said earlier, once you attract them and you hire them, what positions they go into obviously would be different. How you would retain a polymathic person would be different because they're going to want rotations, continual learning, mentoring, coaching. That group is going to be very much dedicated to continual improvement and learning. Whereas the narrow specialists, I don't know, they're probably going to be more relaxed and sort of comfy with less of that. Mm-hmm. So the way you retain those groups would be different. The way you develop would be different. So once you have a polymathic person, you would develop them in a more broad-minded way. Maybe you'd have rotations or assignments or mini gigs within the company or even outside the company. And for specialists, the way that you develop them would be to help them get deeper and deeper into their own field of expertise.
Right.
So those are just a few ideas for how I think organizations could be really strategic moving forward into the complex future. Mm-hmm. Instead of telling this narrative that, everybody needs to be specialists and then discriminating against people who aren't. And I use that word on purpose because that's really what they do, which is so sad. And what ends up happening, by the way, is highly, highly talented polymathic people who feel like organizations don't get them, don't appreciate them, don't let them use their full talent. They leave or they never go in, and they become entrepreneurs so that they can bring their full expertise to work. Right. And get the sense of fulfillment that brings. So organizations are missing out. There's a lost opportunity. Not to say every organization is like this, but vast majority in 2020 are like this.
And
Yeah. So
speaking to that, I was really quick. I was just curious.
yeah.
So that's been my personal experience, which is obviously like why I do what I do. But are you
Hmm.
aware of any organizations that actively utilize those strategies and like trying to attract individuals with many interests and experiences?
Google.
Yeah.
Google's the best one I've seen.
And you see
They
how successful they are as well.
Google Google's going to take over the world. Google is an amazing organization. I mean, it's unmatched. And they do not like hiring narrow specialists. I mean, their chief
That's awesome.
learning officer, I've heard, I can't remember his name, but I remember, I did a bit of research on Google once I realized they were like this, and their environment is much too fluid
Right.
and demanding to get people who just want to do routine stuff over and over. They need people who are going to flex and grow and improve and change with the times. So they don't like to hire narrow specialists, and they're very clear about that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I didn't know that, but that is really cool.
Yep. Google, if you'd like to hire me, let me know.
We'll try to get this out to them. So we're coming up on an hour here. One of the most important questions that I wanted to ask you was, I feel like dialogue is super important, obviously, but dialogue not just amongst individuals who agree, dialogue amongst individuals who don't agree. So if you're in a situation where you are talking to like a diehard specialist and not trying to convince them that their way of life is wrong, because that's not true, obviously, but just to show them that there is value in embracing the breadth of the human experience and not necessarily just the depth, what would you say to them?
Right. So first off, I probably wouldn't try to change their opinion. Like, I would be happy to engage in a dialogue, but I feel like if someone wants to live their life as a narrow specialist, like if that's what they choose, if that's how they choose to curate their life story, and that brings them joy and fulfillment, more power to them. Actually, we need specialists.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't like dismiss or anything. I wouldn't, disrespect the value of specialists, because we need them too. So I just want to say that right off the bat. Like, if they want to be narrow specialists, then more power to them. But the thing is, I'm not sure specialists feel the same way back towards us. Like, I think the specialists just, or maybe not specialists in particular, but the general narrative in our society is to be a specialist. And so the same sort of like, be what brings you joy, curate your life thoughtfully, that I would like to offer to anyone I would engage in a debate or conversation with. I don't feel like polymaths get that back.
Right.
We just get the story of being a narrow specialist. So there's a lot of pressure in our society to sacrifice breadth for depth. And polymaths, of course, choose both. Like, even when you go to pick your college major or pick your profession or how you write your resume, like, there is so much pressure to be narrow and focused and specialized in order to be professional. And so I feel like this kind of takes away from our humanity. Like, I just get this image of like little cogs and big wheels to some extent, or like the silos that keep us separated and kind of blinded to, put blinders on us and keep us in boxes when we aspire to think outside the box. Kind of ironic, we live in an age that's like, think outside the box. And then we get in our boxes. We go get in our boxes. I think we're meant to live authentically, to live fully, to become our best and most true selves. And polymathy is a way, for me at least, that's the way that I do it. Right now, polymaths are the exception, not the rule, at least in organizations. However, the more people I talk to, this is something I'll share too. My dissertation has gotten a bit of attention that I never expected, truly. And I really think it's because polymathy is so natural to people. I think it's in our nature for the vast majority of people. They want to live broadly and deeply and and learn and grow and self-direct their own learning journeys through life. And so it's like this odd thing where it's natural, but it's not like prevalent. It's not the leading narrative. To The leading narrative is to be narrow and specialized, right? And so my point is, I wouldn't try to change a specialist. I would try to help them see the value in polymathic experience and knowledge and approaches to life. Polymaths are great at solving problems. They're creative, innovative. Innovation frequently occurs now at the intersection of disciplines, not within disciplines. Like, we're beyond, whatever innovations would have occurred within silos has been done for the most part.
Right.
Where we see innovation now in 2020 and onward is when you make new combinations, frequently at the intersection of disciplines. And so that's where polymaths really do well. That's where they're coming from. So when we are in a world with complex problems where we need innovative solutions, polymaths may be our best answer to get those solutions. What else can I say? I guess, if we could, I wouldn't try to, just to answer your question more directly, I wouldn't try to change the specialist, but I would get them to try to see more holistically that there's value in sort of different approaches, but beyond their own specialized experience. And I think there's actually great danger if we don't, but if we had a world that was only narrow specialists, and the world is getting more and more complex, I think that's a very risky thing for us as a society and a civilization and a species to do to ourselves. We've got to think strategically as a species. There's a lot of serious problems that we face.
Yeah.
There's a pandemic going on.
Complex
There's global warming.
Problems.
There's a lot of complexity. And so, in a complex adaptive system like planet Earth, you can't predict solutions to complex problems. They'll emerge over time. But what we as individuals can do to help contribute to the emergence of the solutions is to be a strong member, to be a knowledgeable member, to be a broadly experienced member, so that we can pull those multiple tools out of our toolkit, so that we can create unique combinations to solve problems, so that we can just live our best lives and be all in and live fully and vibrantly. Yeah. So there's my dog again. So anyway, on that note,
taking it out of the individual. So like you said, I entirely agree. Like, most individuals, at least a vast majority of people, feel naturally the desire to learn, to be broad and to be deep. Mm-hmm. How, in your opinion, how can we shift the societal norm to be more polymathic rather than specialist?
I think we've got to just spread more awareness. It's crazy. I mean, this is just in the past year or two, this topic has started to get more attention. There were some books that came out last year in 2019. Range by David Epstein came out. Marquize Ahmed wrote the book The Polymath. Later this year, Peter Burke from Cambridge has a book coming out. I haven't read it yet, obviously, because it's not out, called The Polymath. And just even on social media and YouTube, like, I've seen people to start to broach this topic. But, my dissertation was the first dissertation and only doctoral dissertation written on this ever, as far as I'm aware. And so, there's really a need to talk about it, spread awareness. And, that's how we can move this forward. And like I said, be strategic about it as a collective. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I totally agree. Awareness is always the first, perhaps most important step. And then out of that, once we can get a huge collective of individuals aware of, in my opinion, the problem, then only then can we actually start working together to create the most effective solutions.
Yeah,
but with
absolutely.
That said, so you mentioned your polymath's place and things of that nature. Would you mind just reminding anyone who watches this video where they can find your contributions to the polymathic community and this movement to embrace polymathy?
Sure. Yeah. So of course my dissertation, that's out there. If you Google "In Pursuit of Polymaths," Catalesa, or even if you just Google In Pursuit of Polymaths, I'm pretty sure it'll be like the first or second thing to come up. It's on ResearchGate. So that's, you know, my dissertation. It's out there. You can take a look at it. I'm not sure you'd want to read the whole thing, but you might want to check out like the last chapter, chapter 5. It kind of summarizes that whole monster.
It was awesome. A little promo. I read most of it.
Oh, wow.
Awesome.
Well, thanks for
Super
reading
enlightening.
it. So aside from the dissertation, I've got a YouTube channel called Polymaths, and it's with a apostrophe S, Polymaths Place. And the same name is the name of my Facebook group. I have like an Instagram and Twitter account, but I'm not really active on them. And my email address, if you'd like to reach me, is polymathsplace@gmail.com. That one doesn't have an apostrophe, it's just polymathsplace@gmail.com. So those are a few things I've got now. And I'm also, in the future at some point going to be starting a coaching, offering coaching. I'm a certified coach and have begun working as a coach professionally. But I'd like to, offer that service specifically for polymath, because I feel like with my background, I could be able to help people work through challenges and, achieve their goals. Given I really understand polymath pretty well. I'm also working on a couple books, and, I intend to be active in this field for many years to come. So if you Google my name at any point in the future, Angela Catalesa, you could probably figure out what I'm working on then to support polymaths.
Yeah, and I'm super excited that you'll be participating at the Take Initiative Summit in July. So that'll be super awesome. I'm excited to hear your message during that event.
Yeah, me too.
And
you took initiative, man. You took initiative to organize that Take Initiative Summit.
We'll see how it goes. Did you have any final questions for me?
What brought you, tell me a little bit more about why you're passionate about polymathy. What has made you want to dedicate yourself to creating this summit and offering coaching services? Tell me a little bit about your why.
So, really the spark of it, like I mentioned, was my college experience. And for a while, I just felt guilty when I had decided to withdraw from my degree, because, like I said, I was able to get a full ride scholarship because of my academic performance. And I just felt like I was throwing away somebody else's money. Like somebody had invested in me to specialize in getting this engineering degree. And I was super grateful for that, because I didn't necessarily have the financial resources to do that on my own. So it was a super awesome opportunity. But then eventually I just came to the conclusion, or I was able to accept that even though I didn't necessarily go forward and get that degree, the amount of experiences I was able to have in college was insane. And a huge part of that is the reason why I'm here today. Throughout those 3 years of my college experience, I was the president of the National Society of Black Engineers chapter at the Colorado School of Mines. I became the regional treasurer for the same organization and helped co-found and was the advisor for a NSBE junior chapter in Denver, which was essentially just a chapter dedicated to helping the youth, the African American and minority youth in Denver, get introduced to STEM and understand that this is totally a thing that they can pursue. Because obviously, just in STEM in general, there's a huge gap between the demographics of who is in the STEM field. That's a whole nother conversation. But those experiences, and then I was able to travel to Nepal and do a service project there, and just all these experiences really showed me that there's so much possibility in the world. And the fact that I grew up and was raised with this mindset, and it's not just my personal family and friends, but just society tells you that in order to be successful, you go to school, you graduate high school, you go to college, you get a 9-to-5, eventually you retire. Hopefully along the way you have a family and contribute to the lives of other people, but there is another way. And once I was able, and Emily Wapnick, I'm super grateful for her work, because even though I don't necessarily it's the same with you, I don't necessarily vibe with the multi-potentialite identity. Like, it's super important just for the awareness for individuals to find her work and realize, wow, I'm not the only person who feels like I really do want to learn about all of these things. Like, that awareness, like you mentioned, is super
Mm-hmm.
important. So her
Yeah.
work, your work, all these individuals, academic and entrepreneurial, and individuals who like are
Mm-hmm.
trying to show the world that there is more to life than just specialize and die. Like, I feel like
Yeah.
that is so important, especially for the evolution of humanity. And so,
Specialize and die. I
yeah.
love it. I never thought of it that way.
I mean, in my opinion, like, that is the narrative that we're sold. Like, get your education, and the education is not self-directed. It's very standardized, and like, you need to learn these things. You need to specialize, and eventually you'll just die.
Yeah.
And it's a shame.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Gosh, I don't
So
want to live my life that way.
yeah, exactly. And most people don't. So it's so important. Again, I appreciate you helping me,
Yeah.
not only with this conversation, but in the our upcoming endeavors, and just to get the message out there. Like, there is another way to live, and it's super important that people understand that.
Yeah. Well, it's my pleasure. I'm so happy to see other people sort of joining this because for a long time it felt like a pretty lonely field with only a few of us like, thinking and writing and working in it. But for
Yeah,
the past year or two, there's been I feel like we're at the beginning of a boom for
yeah,
awareness and appreciation for the
absolutely.
power of polymaths, and so I'm just happy to see more people joining because it was a pretty lonely,
Which
a
seems
lonely
to be the
field for a
theme.
while.
Seems to be the theme of living a polymathic lifestyle. Lonely.
Yeah, I
They need to
know.
start changing that.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I can't wait to see you at the Take Initiative Summit in July.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me, and I hope you have a good day too.
Thank you. See ya.
All right, bye bye.